As I mentioned before the show started, John Guandolo is in the studio with us. You probably recognize his name. He's been here many times. And he is the founder of Understanding the Threat. I'll let him tell you a little bit about that organization. He's a 1989 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy. He became an officer in the United States Marine Corps. I could read a very lengthy resume here, but he served in our military very honorably. He left the military, resigned his commission in 1996, joined the FBI, served in the Washington field office, conducted narcotics investigations. But the really cool thing he did is that shortly after 9/11, John Guandolo began an assignment to the Counterterrorism Division of the FBI's Washington field office, developing an expertise in the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic doctrine, the global Islamic movement, and terrorist organizations, including Hamas, Al-Qaeda, and others. He has actually read the Quran, studied Islamic terror, studied what Al-Qaeda does, what Hamas does, and actually the teachings of Islam itself. So, without further ado, I want to introduce and welcome John Guandolo.
Thank you. Great to be here, especially on Veterans Day. And just want a little shout out to my Marine brothers and sisters out there. Happy birthday, one day late. So thanks for having me on as always.
I'm glad you're here. And actually, my listeners, I meant to say Happy Veterans Day. Usually I do a long spiel on Veterans Day and run through all the great service. There's so much going on. I didn't do it, and I apologize. I love our military. I love our veterans. Thank you.
Well, you've got me here.
That's right. That's why I have him here, I swear. No, anyway, but on a very serious note, I think that there are, we're going to play today or tomorrow some stories are coming out already by people who voted for Biden saying, wait a minute, he believes in that, he's doing that. I think this might be one of them. I don't recall any overt campaign statement by Biden saying, you know what, I'm going to reverse that Muslim ban. I know he made statements that were very friendly toward Islam and to Islamic immigrants, but I think this might take America by surprise. I don't know, his supporters. My question to you is, as President Trump attempted, let's do a quick background. So Trump got into office. He had 3 or 4 attempts to put something in place, which he had clear both congressional statutory authority and constitutional authority to do, to say, we need to vet better for people coming from countries where Islamic jihad is out of control, is a big problem. And he had several courts strike those down, on and on. We finally got around to, I think it was even 2018, when finally the Supreme Court ruled that his order met constitutional muster, 5-4 call, but they said, yes, of course, he can put in place an executive order to protect Americans and their health and well-being. And partly it was the issue about Islamic jihad. It was also people coming from countries where the government is so non-existent, weak, not organized, that you couldn't actually get good information from the country where the person is coming from to know what they're all about. So just I'd love to have you start and riff. What is your reaction to the idea of the he who would be president, Biden, saying one of his day one orders is going to be essentially to end all of this travel protection for the American people?
Well, let's begin with what he just announced yesterday, that he would make a senior advisor out of Farouk Mitha, who's a Hamas leader in the United States, who is on the board of a group called Engage, which is a Hamas organization in the U.S. Now, that's the organization that a couple months ago, he spoke online to their online conference to get millions of Muslims to vote for him. They actually supported Hamas doing business as Engage, his campaign publicly.
Biden's campaign.
Yes. He started his speech by saying thank you to Engage, and within 14 seconds, he says we need to teach more Islam in U.S. schools.
I know.
He says he did say that one of the first things I'm going to do is repeal this ban, and he called it a Muslim ban. He said, then he said a whole bunch of other things, but specifically he quoted Islam's Prophet Muhammad in a quote that literally calls for jihad against non-Muslims. So right out of the gate, before he's even president, he's saying, I'm going to make this guy my advisor. So I don't think, not only will he open the gates back up to people that are hostile to us, he is knowingly bringing Hamas guys into his administration, which doesn't even legally exist yet.
Okay, I'm going to back up. Say the name of the gentleman that you just said he's going to appoint.
Farouk Mitha, M-I-T-H-A.
Okay.
And he's a board member. He and his father are board members, and his father was one of the founders, the treasurer of Mgage on the legal documents. This is a Hamas organization founded by a former director of CARE and a lawyer for Hamas doing business as CARE nationally. So there's no doubt this is a Hamas organization. This guy, Farouk Mitha, so everyone understands, this is the guy that was the National Islamic Advisor to Mrs. Clinton and has been the National Islamic Advisor to Mr. Biden, a Hamas guy right out of the gate.
Okay, first of all, that E is E-M-G-A-G-E, correct?
Yes,
Mgage.
Mgage.
Yeah, I've read it actually on your website. We'll talk about it in a minute, but I've read about them. But it's very interesting when you mentioned that interview and Biden's comments. I saw that and I went back, and it was a week later, so I was thinking about playing it in the show. I honestly think that social media did a really good job burying that. I mean, you kept trying to, because I knew he'd said it, and I think they were thinking, this didn't sound very good, and so they tried to backpedal him, and I never did play it on the show. I did see that interview, and I think actually the campaign was trying to downplay it too, because they thought, maybe he's trying to play the Muslim vote, but this is not going to fly with, Susie of the suburbs. Yeah.
Probably not, but one thing that I think is worth noting is then, during the last presidential debate, he said, inshallah, when are we going to see your tax returns? Inshallah. And we did, first of all, I did about a 20-minute breakdown of the speech he did to the Mgage thing, which is on our YouTube page at Understand the Threat. But I also did a very short, 30-second video on him saying inshallah. Now which means God willing to a Muslim.
Yes.
If Allah wills it. The reality is there were people that said he didn't say that, he said something else. His own campaign admitted he said it. The Muslim community was bragging that he said it. And the people from Mgage, who he is working with, and I would argue that own him, they were, bloviating about it. So that's exactly what he said. You can hear him specifically articulate it. And that's why I made a video of it, made news out of it. I mean, he is bought and paid for by our enemies.
Okay, on the subject of your website, understandingthethreat.com, great website to go to, full of information. And also, I think for people to go there, you can link to other things you've written in the past. I mean, it's a really great source. It's an amazing thing in America. It's one of those issues, the concern about Islamic Jihad, the way the left has painted the issue as it's really just, are you inclusive and culturally accepting, or are you xenophobic? It's a very hard issue. Very few serious pundits will talk very much about the danger of Islamic Jihad, because so quickly you're pounced on by, not just the left-wing media, but on some forces on the right. Some people just say this is very insensitive, that you shouldn't be going there. So I'm grateful for your website and for your work, for doing all that.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so given where we are, we have, and I was going to mention to our listeners, I didn't, it seems like we've been just drowning in news about COVID, and it does really matter because, as Simone Gold said so brilliantly, we have a little bit of a healthcare problem, we have a constitutional crisis. That's where we are with COVID. But we have not talked about these other instances, but even as America rolls along, the world rolls along, we're dealing with COVID, jihad around the world just keeps happening. I mean, it's been ongoing. It isn't as though because America took a pause from paying attention to it in the media that it isn't happening. So there was a recent incident in Mozambique. I'm sure you're familiar with this. I'll just share with our listeners. This just happened this week, I think, but in, actually I'm not finding the right paper, but in Mozambique, there was a group that is said they're trying to establish they're working toward a caliphate. The caliphate got destroyed with the portion of it that they had tried to establish in Iran and Syria. President Trump came along and said, I don't think so. But then ISIS is now working in West Africa, in Mozambique, talking about how they're going to reestablish it there. Do you know much about that, what happened in Mozambique?
So first, I think any of these things we're talking about, whether it's what's been going on in France with the killings by Muslims in France, whether we're talking about the various things going on in Africa, the key to remember is, and this is, Americans have been told for almost 20 years, and I would argue before that, that this has to do with groups like this group in Mozambique, or ISIS, or we're calling them the Islamic State now, or Al-Qaeda, or Hamas, or Hezbollah, or Boko Haram, and Muslim Brotherhood on the suit-wearing jihadi side, or Tablighi Jamaat, or Jamaat Islami. And the issue is not that there are all these groups out there trying to do these things, to establish a caliphate and impose Sharia on every human on earth through all means necessary, according to them. The issue is, globally, they have a strategy and are actually doing what they say they're going to do. So you've nailed it, is that what's going on in Mozambique, the push to establish the core of the caliphate there. When we back out and look at the strategic picture, we see Erdogan set up training.
Who is?
The president of Turkey, President Erdogan of Turkey, who will be the next caliph of the global Islamic State. He will be the caliph. They've said it, they're calling him Sultan already. And if you've noticed, he's been the one on the global scene already calling out what's been going on in France, saying that France is Islamophobic, which again triggers Muslims to act. He supports what's going on. You have the former prime minister of Malaysia who called for killing of millions of Muslims in France, because that's all lawful under Islamic law. Now, what has this got to do with just Mozambique? Because we have to look at that, just like we have to look at the attack in France or any attacks here in the United States, through the lens of their strategic plan. Erdogan in Turkey has built a training base in Somalia, in Mogadishu. Now, why would he do that?
A training base for jihadist
For
terrorists.
jihadists, right? And why is he meeting with Ilhan Omar, who just happens to represent the largest Somali population, arguably, in the United States?
Yeah.
Right? Because they're at war.
Erdogan meeting with Ilhan Omar.
Right. So because they're at war, they're actually doing what they're doing. And our intel is telling us that at the leadership level here in the United States and North America of the Muslim Brotherhood and the broader Islamic movement, they haven't missed a beat. They are already moving forward. You will see, if Mr. Biden gets elected, you'll see people in senior levels of the government who are suit-wearing jihadis, just like we've seen in previous administrations. You will see it at a level we've never seen it before. But they are rolling out their whole strategy to win the war. And they are, the scariest part is they are coordinating at the local, state, national, international level with the communists, with the Democrats, with the Comintern, with the CPUSA, Democratic Socialists of America, at all levels. And I'll just close this thought, this question, this part of the discussion with this. I cannot overemphasize or overstress how well coordinated these two efforts, the communist effort and the jihadi effort, are. At the international level of the Islamic movement down to the local mosque level in the United States. That's how granular they're coordinating this effort. Same thing in the communist movement, not as detailed, but certainly well detailed, but their coordination between each other is very significant.
Yeah, I love all that commentary. Thank you for every little bit of it. Going back to the Mozambique issue, I love your point, and this is something you've talked about many times, but I do think Americans, they don't want to believe a whole religion could be a problem. So they say, well, this group is bad, but you know, these other people, Muslims, they denounce them. But what you've gotten at, so they aren't bad. So people look at the Islamic jihadist terror thing and say, well, if we can just defund Hamas, if we can just somehow contain Hezbollah, if we can just stop these fighters who are Al-Qaeda, then we can make it okay. And the analogy I've made, which I can't remember if I made it with you before, but people who are deeply concerned about white supremacism. White supremacism is a horrible thing. And all 10 of them in the United States of America are bad people. Not really 10, but it's a tiny, tiny segment. The analogy is the people who say they're so worried about white supremacism, and you should be, and you should hate it, it's the ideology behind it. whether they all know each other or not, whether they never met each other, whether one lives in Idaho, one lives in Florida. I mean, they have that ideology, and they're always all about it. And it's not, and so the concept of these organizations being based in some different country, some different place, and well, they're very different groups. It's the ideology that motivates them. But the analogy that I'm making to white supremacism, which many leftists can relate to and feel concerned about, is the white supremacist is not an organized religion. It's just a hateful, ugly, bad people. But Islam itself is what is, the teachings of Islam itself is what is driving this violence. So it doesn't matter what flavor of the group is, the name of the group, the geography they're from. It's the ideology of Islam driving them, which is ultimately always about bringing Sharia eventually to control the world.
That's right. And I think the key here for your viewers is that while there may be Muslims or people who identify themselves as Muslim that don't want to live under Sharia, don't want to impose it on you and me, that's awesome, but that's not taught anywhere in Islam. So what they're living out of is a normal, what I would call a normal human experience of wanting to live around your neighbors and get along. There's two big keys to this. And for the people that out there that don't understand this, I just would share this part. Al-Qaeda and ISIS haven't been wrong when they've quoted Islamic law in furtherance of what they're doing. So think about that. What's taught right here in Dallas, Texas, in Islamic schools to 10-year-old children about Islam is exactly the opposite of what Islamic advisors are telling U.S. leaders about Islam. So there's a question. Someone's being lied to, and I'm just going to ruin it for everyone and say...
Tell you the answer? Yeah.
Right. Muslim children in U.S. Islamic schools are being taught the truth about Islam. It's a capital crime in Islam for a Muslim to teach another Muslim something about Islam that's not true. So when we, understanding the threat, are talking to, whether it's a sheriff, a congressman, national security advisor, or a citizen about Islam, we use what they use to teach Islam in mosques, Islamic schools, and organizations across the world. You will not find an authoritative book of Islamic law that does not define Islam, and its purpose, the sole purpose of Islam, is to wage war against the non-Muslim world until Sharia is imposed on everyone on earth. It's the purpose of Islam. To say that's wrong, for someone to disagree with that, is to be wrong 100% of the time. The problem is, I believe, one of the big problems is, Islam commands people, Muslims, to lie to non-Muslims if it advances the cause. And two, you just mentioned it. People will say, well, I know a Muslim and they act like this, or this person I've worked with, or they'll come to me,
really nice.
Or someone will come to me wearing a suit and will say, that guy over there, that ISIS guy that cut that person's head off, well, he's bad and I denounce that. Well, that's great. So please tell me what it is you believe in that's different from what drives him. And the answer is nothing. So the people, so we've got, and from the warfare perspective, we call that splintering. So Hamas, doing business as the Council on American Islamic Relations, will point to an Al-Qaeda guy and will say, that's bad. And we denounce this. We denounce this terrorism, just like they did after the killings in San Bernardino. One of the senior Muslim Brotherhood leaders stood on CNN, said, we denounce this. And we want police to get to the bottom of this so long as you never hold Islam accountable for this, because we don't believe in this. And don't you dare even look.
Yeah.
They're very clear about what it is they're all about.
Okay, I want to get to with so many different topics, but the question people listening to what you're saying always have is, well, if all of this is true, and if you have Biden, should he, God help us, become president, but if he were, and he were to bring into his administration Farouk Mitha or other people like that, why is it that the Democrats and the leftists aren't afraid of them? I mean, if what you're saying is true, do they just think they somehow will escape the wrath of the Islamic Jihad, or they think that what you're saying is wrong and that there's a peaceful version of Islam that really is the majority and it's only a tiny little segment who are violent? I mean, what is the justification you get to in the left to bringing someone like this in the administration?
So the Democrat Party, their platform that we heard from all, certainly in general terms, but from all the candidates for president, We hear it from their Senate and congressional leadership. They're the party of killing babies at any point, even after birth.
Yeah.
They're the point, not to mention they're the party of the KKK and slavery and anti-civil rights legislation,
Yeah.
but let's push that aside. They're the party of eugenics. They're the party of destroying the republic, getting rid of the electoral process, taking away your unalienable right to defend yourself, as articulated or affirmed in the Second Amendment, the right to free expression.
Yes.
And so they are the party of totalitarianism. So if someone has a problem with me or colleagues of mine saying the Democrat Party is the Communist Party leadership in the United States, okay, let's just call them totalitarians who are seeking to destroy the republic. That's just objectively true because they say it. They're pulling down the very things that hold the republic up. That's what they have in common with the Islamic movement, which also wants to destroy the republic just in a different way, but they're using a lot of the same tactics. They're attacking the same pillars, the key pillars of the society.
Of American society,
That's
yeah.
right.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, they're going to conflict. I mean, if they really ended up destroying, I always get around this, but I'm not in the slightest disagreeing with you. I just don't know how you can sleep at night on the left realizing, well, yeah, we want to bring America down too, but they don't really want to become Muslim themselves. I don't think Biden wants to become subject to Sharia. He just thinks somehow he'll be exempt from it, or he'll be, or he doesn't believe that is their mission. You know what I'm getting at? I mean, it's the craziest thing.
I think in what we're experiencing, and quite frankly, what we have for 20 years in this country, is a real destruction of critical thought, discernment, reason, thinking, and what you see on the political left, on the communist left. The Democrat Party is the leading edge of the communist movement in the United States. And they practically say it on the streets, if you listen, and in the halls of Congress. And so they do believe, because I think to do what they're doing also requires a tremendous amount of pride, arrogance, and some of them are dumb as stumps, but some of them are not. Some of them are dangerously, intellectually sharp on where they're going, but they're intellectually dishonest, that at some point Islam will...
There has to be a conflict.
There will be a conflict. And again, I go back to brown shirts, black shirts of Hitler's government. That we just, the brown shirts were the communist agitators, just like Black Lives Matter and Antifa are on the streets today. But in the end, the black shirts came in and executed all of them, killed them in one night, the night of the long knives, and they were dead. And the black shirts, as Hitler said, were the more rational, reasonable people, but those were the Gestapo, the SS, and his inner circle. Those black shirts, those are the jihadis here in the United States. And they are ready for real war.
Okay, we've done this before. I'm going to have you back longer to get more in depth on this, although we've done it in the past. I do want to hit the decision made by President Trump, which is changing topics a bit, but Trump to relieve Mark Esper of his duties. But on the subject of the order that President Trump, the one that survived constitutional muster, the Supreme Court said it was okay. It was essentially a way to try to protect Americans from refugees, immigrants coming to our country who either couldn't be verified because there's no government where they're from, or they have a background, which he was calling for intensive vetting, enhanced vetting, figure out who they are. Are they possibly jihadists coming to America, trying to protect American people from them? I honestly think that the short attention span America, we've had COVID's been the big thing, and so everyone's afraid of that. It's all we can talk about is COVID. Then the elections came along, it's all we can talk about. But this jihadist, the international jihadist relentless movement's ongoing. So we had the incident for our listeners in Mozambique. They had, whatever the group was, I think it was Al-Qaeda, whoever it was, they went into a village or an area and they rounded up all the women and girls, kidnapped them, and beheaded the men and boys, 50 people, 50, and literally after beheading them, dismembered them and buried them in some field or left them in some field. This was just one action in Mozambique, but additionally in Western Europe, as we've talked about many times on the show, but we had recent incidents. We had a school teacher literally murdered in the streets of Paris for having showed to his class a picture. You're not allowed in Islam to picture Muhammad, to show a depiction of him. That's what he did. He was beheaded in the streets. You had an attack in Paris. You had, and actually this is one of the points I can tell you, it's so interesting. You had in a church in France, you had 3 poor people who happened to want to show up for Catholic service, stabbed to death in church by an Islamist terrorist. In Vienna, the police are on high alert because you had a guy who opened fire in the capital city, just started shooting, killed 3 people, injured 15. But the interesting headline, I'll close this out before I turn to talking about Esper. For the New York Times, of all places, which I don't subscribe to them, but I did happen to get access to this. In the New York Times, they start off by saying, the police were surprised in France because all of the people who were attacked in connection, they said, all were unknown to police intelligence officials. None of the most recent attackers pledged allegiance to a terrorist group or to a group, and no group claimed them as members, and none stated any political agenda. So they're saying that they were so puzzled by the terrorist conduct of these people because you couldn't spy on them as the government and figure out from social media who they hang out with, what they're part of. And it's kind of a validation of everything you're saying. If you're only looking for members of Al-Qaeda, Hezbollah, or this or that group, you're missing the larger point. And this is actually interesting because the police are now talking about that. How do we miss these people? It's because they missed the point you're making. If you want to comment on that before I get to
the only comment I'll make is in our 3-day program for law enforcement, every class we do, as I mentioned on the show before, they all say we've never heard this information. We believe it's critical to protecting our community. But I also have officers who will come up and say, okay, I had this case where XYZ happened. Now I know that was actually a jihadi. And quick example, in Boston, a year before the Boston Marathon bombings by the 2 jihadis that we have identified, the Tsarnaev brothers, a Jewish young man, teenager, I believe he was 19 at the time, was killed and beheaded. His head was pretty much sawed off. The homicide investigators, and I looked at these homicide investigators, just did a cursory review. They looked like they were very good investigators, solid careers, but they walked in and they found drugs and money in the room, nothing stolen. This guy's dead. If it's John Guandolo walking in that room, the first person I'm looking for is a Sharia adherent Muslim.
Because the person who was killed was Jewish.
And because of the manner of the death.
Oh yeah.
Right?
That beheading.
And so, but they don't do that. And the homicide detective said he had no idea because they're not trained. And we've trained narcotics officers, homicide detectives, gang detectives, all kinds of people, and it radically changes. They're now when they go in, we have several major cases that have been made around the country just based on our teaching and consultation, because now they're like, oh, that's what we're looking for.
Yeah.
Now they can actually, the way they interview them, the way when they can visually identify not only what they say, how they act, how they dress, you can identify people as jihadis, and that's critical, and no one else in the country is teaching them but us. So,
actually, I did want to give you a chance. I want to turn to our John Brennan clip. I'll play in just a moment. Yeah, I can't wait to have you hear your thoughts. But quickly, Understanding the Threat is an organization you founded, and you provide training. You can just quickly spiel law enforcement.
So yes,
officers.
so we have a number. I encourage you to go to understandingthethreat.com, go to our website, and several tabs you can use. Certainly go to the training page, go to the resources page, and go to the blog page, because you'll get the articles, a ton of resources on the resources page and the different training. But we do something no one else does. We train citizens around the country to map out and identify communist and jihadi networks at the local level and how to aggressively and lawfully build a team and operate against them and render these networks at the local level incapable of operating. And it's key because we're going to win or lose this war at the local level. We also have a number of training programs like our 2-week Train the Trainer, so you can actually teach this material. But please use the website, go to understandingthethreat.com, sign up for the newsletter, and it plugs you into everything.